Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And today we have May Cobb, who's going to be talking about her brand new book, The Hunting Wives. And just today they arrived. We just finished unpacking the box. We have a bunch of signed books left with this cool bookmark. And I'll go ahead and, for those of you watching, I will put a link in the comments field for the signed copies should you wish to order one.
Patrick, was there a little piece of art next to her signature?
It's a bookmark, a cool bookmark, yeah.
Can you hold it up a little better? Because it is very cool. It just caught my eye. Right, but isn't there something on this right next to her signature? Didn't she draw something?
It's like a martini.
Yeah,
Right.
Did you do that in all of them?
I did. I just got curious.
Cool.
Yeah.
I thought I recognized it. My husband's usually have 6 olives on the side because he likes so many olives, he doesn't want it to displace the gin. So we have them trained, but I recognize the glass.
Your husband's like me. I love that.
And also joining us this evening is Laurie Elizabeth Flynn, the author of The Girls Are All So Nice Here. And thanks for holding that up. And she's going to be conducting the interview along with Barbara Peters. So I will be monitoring the comments field, everybody. So if you have questions for May or Laurie, just go ahead and put them in and I'll reemerge at some point to ask some of those questions. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm sorry for my scratchy voice. I don't know where it came from. But anyway, I'm delighted to meet May at long last because this all starts months before we actually do this. There's a lot of scheduling and the publicists talk to you and they sent me a manuscript because they didn't have a reading copy. And, so there's a lot that goes on. And by the time we finally meet face to face, we've had several conversations. So May actually is the author of a previous book, Big Woods, and she published it. It's an interesting story that I hope you guys will talk about. She published it with a smaller press that has now Midnight Ink, right? Isn't that May?
Yes, that's correct.
Which was a casualty, as often is true, of small presses in publishing world. And now she's publishing with a much bigger company, Berkeley, which is part of the Penguin Random House complex. So that'd be fun to talk about, your different publishing experiences. And our interviewer today has written some YA novels, 3, did you say?
Yes, 3.
And now this is her first adult novel that Patrick held up. So I'm going to turn this over to you two, and I will interrupt as I always do when anything occurs to me.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so much. So we're so excited for The Hunting Wives to come out tomorrow. I have been raving about this book for months. I think I read it late in the summer or early in the fall. And I was supposed to be working on my own book at the time. And I remember I was like, I'm just going to read a chapter and then I'll put it down. And I never did end up putting it down. I read it the entire day. And then I messaged May and I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with your book. So that was the start of my obsession with this book. And the great thing about it is that May is such a wonderful person and we've become really good friends throughout this. So it's the best part of publishing, in my opinion. And my copy arrived and look at how beautiful it is. It's so cool.
Really is.
It's one of the best covers. I'm just obsessed with this cover. So like, who wouldn't buy this at a bookstore, I think. So,
I could interrupt this. I do and say it's really unusual to see that blue. And in crime fiction, that color blue is a fairly rare thing. Oftentimes we get strong reds and black. Well, we saw Laurie's cover. So I think it's a very arresting cover just from the unexpectedness of the blue.
I didn't think about that, but you're right. It's an unusual color for that genre.
Yeah, it really stands out and it's perfectly symbolic of what happens in the book. So I remember when I saw it for the first time, I was like, that is perfect. It fits the content of what happens in the pages so well. And I think I've like literally picked May's brain about everything involving this book because I'm so like obsessed with how someone would come up with this great idea. So I'm going to start asking you some questions. And yeah, I think everyone else is probably really excited to learn about it too. So my first question is, what inspired the Hunting Wives, and what was your process like to write the book?
So the first idea for it really came when I was up visiting my mother in East Texas, and she's just a fabulous storyteller. And we're driving along the backcountry roads, and she goes into this story about how when she was in high school in the East Texas in the 60s, she starts telling me about something called the hunting party. And it was basically rich boys who like to go out into the woods on the weekends and sit on the hoods of their giant cars and shoot at like rabbits and stuff. And she went once, she didn't know that's what was going to be happening. And when she was telling me that, I thought that could go so wrong so quickly. And I just became sort of obsessed with the idea of that. And I very quickly decided it needed to be an all-female shooting club, because I'm very interested in toxic female friendships, and I loved Ruth Ware's In a Dark, Dark Wood, and I wanted to do something in that vein that sort of explored that. And that's also why everyone, I'm obsessed with Laurie's book, because it is so dark and twisty and unflinching, and really looks at female friendships and the pressure and the power dynamics. So I have to just give a shout out, because I'm equally obsessed with her book. I read it in 2 days, which is rare for me. I hid from my family and my duties, and I binged on it.
That is the best thing to hear. And I love that we are found each other through this, because I feel like we write a lot of similar themes, and it always feels like you found like your kindred spirit. So it's so great.
So great.
And you write those toxic friendships so well. As Barbara was saying earlier, you did have a path to publication that might interest a lot of people, with your debut being with a smaller press. So can you tell everyone a little bit about your path to publication and how you got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So Big Woods is my first novel, and as Barbara was explaining, it came out from a pretty small press called Midnight Ink, which is now defunct. And I'm proud of the book, and it won awards and it got really good reviews. But it, with small presses, it's really hard to make a living at. And I've really been trying to be a writer for about 25 years. And when it came out, and I realized, well, I'm not going to pay the rent this way, honestly. What am I going to do? I was at a real crossroads in my life. Do I really try to keep chasing this passion at 45 years old, or do I start applying for full-time jobs and do that? So I was applying for full-time work, but I also just in a fever wrote the first half of The Hunting Wives in 4 months. And I was in between agents. So around Thanksgiving, I remember it was Thanksgiving week, I was just like, I'm going to send it out to a dozen agents that I think might be interested. And I got multiple offers. And then Victoria Sanders, my wondrous agent, called one day, and we were soulmates basically. And I knew she was the champion for the book. And she very quickly got me in touch with Benet Nauer, who's a fantastic freelance editor. And we worked for about 4 months on the partial, getting it in the best shape to then submit it. And then kind of coming full circle, the book went to auction, and on my mom's birthday, it was, auction day. So I got my offer and everything from Berkeley, from my wonderful editor, Danielle Perez, who's been such a champion for this book, on my mom's birthday. So to come full circle, that's sort of been my path. And it was, it's been wild, because publishing is such a roller coaster. And I know that now. And I'm very excited to be with Berkeley. And gosh, I'm rambling, but that's sort of what happened. And then I wrote the second half over a summer, and then now the book's coming out. So that was all about 2 years ago. 2 years ago when we sold it to Berkeley, and now it's coming out, and I can't wait.
I love that. I think it's so fantastic, because it just shows that everyone has a different path to publication. And I think the key is just to keep persevering through everything, and keep going and keep writing the next idea. If you're, stuck, or just always to be writing something new, because you never know which could be the one. So I love that you persevered, and that this book is what came out of it, because it's so incredible.
I do too. So here I go interrupting again, but you touched on a really interesting thing, which a lot of people who are working on a novel may not be aware of, which is a quote development editor. In your case, it's a freelance editor. Some publishing companies actually have development editors on staff, and I've never been entirely clear what a development editor does, because I filled all those roles. We ran a small press, Poison Pen Press, for a long time. I probably edited over 800 books, and I'm sure I filled the development role and all the rest of it because we didn't have that much staff. And we sold it to Source Books, and I'm very glad that we did. And I'm happy to step back, although I still work with a few of the authors that I originally acquired. But I'm often puzzled as to whether I did a good job as a development editor, or whether I let the authors down. So could you tell us a little bit more about what happened when you worked with your freelance editor? I'd really be interested in knowing.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I need to hear more about the 800 books, Barbara. I knew that y'all had the press and everything. That's
For over
remarkable.
20 years. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a lot. And I still do a lot of editing. I also do freelance editing for, my rule is if I'm going to have to read it one day in order to do an event with the author of the Poison Pen, I might as well read it in advance, but I'm a super speed reader. See, I can read a book in a couple of hours.
Wow.
So I know it's just one of those weird things that a skill I was born with. I didn't actually develop it. And that makes it easier to edit a book in the sense that I can keep the whole book in my head, read it so fast.
Wow.
But it's also a real handicap in some ways. That's why I'm interested in what you have to say about the development editor.
Yeah, so Benet really, the thing that needed, I would say the most work is deepening character motivation and also ratcheting up the tension in different scenes and making sure that the reader stays in the character's mind in those moments. Because sometimes I could be guilty of underwriting, and she would say, Sophie stayed out late at night and Graham is mad at her, but he's not as mad as he should be. So she really pushed me to make like that scene more dramatic and more filled out. And then also really working on Sophie's backstory, because she is such a complicated character. And it was very clear to me. I'm like, oh, I absolutely understand why she's doing all these crazy things. But Benet was like, but readers really probably won't understand. So we need to know what happened, in her childhood and things like that. So she really had me dig in with her backstory, and so people could understand Sophie's arc and why she's behaving the way she's behaving.
So a key point is, one, you have to have provided the raw material, or otherwise the development editor or an editor, whichever way it is, can't actually do anything. But the other is, you make me feel better, because the most frequent conversation I would have with authors is why, or what's going on here. And then they would tell me, and then I would say, well, that's great that you know it, but you forgot to write it down.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so that's really more or less what you're talking about. But I was thinking it might be more in terms of pacing. I am no good at pacing. And I've often thought that maybe a development editor was good on making sure that your book kept the tension throughout, and had those sort of necessary breaks also, because if it's all tension, the reader's so exhausted at the end of the book, they say, don't care. So did that happen too?
I think she definitely helped with the pacing, because sometimes mine would be so plot, and readers did need a break every once in a while. Like, oh my gosh, I'm hungover just from reading that scene. Can Sophie do something normal like garden for a little bit to give readers that dramatic pause? Because I really was just like bam, bam, bam. So she helped slow it down, and yeah, with the overall rhythm, definitely helped.
Reader exhaustion is a real issue. I remember an author years ago who, her book, I was so tired when I finished it. I thought I'm never going to be able to do anything with this. So, Laurie, what was your experience? And then I'll shut up and go back to you. But what did you have a development editor, or how did it go with you? Because this is your first adult novel after writing YA fiction, which clearly is somewhat different.
Yeah, I didn't have a developmental editor. When I queried this book and then signed with my agent and I worked on a couple different larger revision rounds and then a couple different smaller ones before we went on submission. And I'd say that the larger rounds were mostly focused on a lot of setting stuff to get the setting detail correct, because it really had to be perfect because I'm setting it at a real place. So for me to set the book at a real college, it really had to, the details really had to be correct. So a lot of work went into getting that setting right. And I'd say, kind of like May said, character motivations were definitely something that were a focus in those early edits, because they really do drive the whole story. I think, like, if you can make a reader believe that this is how somebody would act and really get on board with the reason why, then I think, you know, your book's going to have a lot more depth than it would if the characters are just doing things and you can't really grasp why. I know as a reader, that is always sort of what brings a book to from, you know, decent to excellent for me, is when I can really relate to why the character would be doing something, even if it's something horrible. If you can get me in that person's head, and I think May does that so well with these women in her book. You know, obviously their behavior isn't great throughout a lot of the book, but you really get a sense of why it's happening. And I think that is really what makes the reading experience heightened for me.
Well, I agree with you. I think I think as a reader, you have to at least like one character in a book, or if not like them, at least relate to them. I've read way too many books, particularly in the trust no one genre, where I don't like anybody in the book. I mean, I just don't care, you know, and they're designed that way in part because it is a trust no one book. But that's hard, I think, sometimes for readers to, you know, wind up with any emotional investment in the story. But you also bring up another good point, which is that agents very often function as development editors today. You know, yours obviously worked with you, Laurie, and I think that a good agent is really essential. An agent who can be passionate about your book, but also help you either by hiring somebody or doing it themselves, or having somebody in the agency do it, to work on it. So it is the best it can be when you know, take it out.
It's very true. My agent is very editorial and brilliant, and it's so much fun to work together, and she just helps me become a better writer. So we have an amazing partnership, and I'm very grateful.
Great. Well, carry on. Sorry, I told you I was going to interrupt. I'll try to be quiet now.
No, this is great.
This is great.
Yes, it really is. When I was reading The Hunting Wives, I was sort of blown away by a lot of these plot twists, twist after twist, and that I didn't see coming. And I read a lot of thrillers, so, you know, I like to think of myself as pretty savvy, but some of the things that happened in this book really took me by surprise. So my question to you, May, is did you always know what twists were coming, or did you sort of surprise yourself as you were writing them and kind of take yourself by surprise by, oh, I didn't think I was going to write this, but it just happened. So I'm always so curious if authors plot ahead of time and know where things are going, or if in this case, if you didn't.
That's such a great question. I wish that I really wish I could plot a lot out and find more, but I find that I can't. I really have to have, usually I'll just have like sort of a bird's eye view, and I'll try to write like a 1-page synopsis, but I won't know so much that happens. So for this one, I knew basically about the all-female shooting club and that Sophie would get in over her head at a certain point, but I really didn't know much beyond that. So I just started writing and tried to let it lead me. I kind of believe in the Stephen King thing that he says about writing is like excavating dinosaur bones, and your job as the author is just to draw them out of the earth as carefully as possible, like the story already exists. And it just, I'm gonna try to plot in the future, but I think I feel like I have to be surprised. Like I didn't even know who the killer was till about halfway through. And I was like, oh yeah, that's who it is. That makes sense. But I sometimes feel like it would be nice to know ahead of time. But I'm not wired that way. And I know you're the same too. You're a pantser, right? Not a
pantser. Yeah, I love that you are too. It's such a, I'm the same as you too. I wish I could plot, because it would really make things at least in my head, I'm like, oh, it'd be so easy if I knew what was coming next to stay organized and not have such a messy first draft. But I'm the same as you. I don't know what's going to happen. So it's, I love hearing from other writers who write thrillers who have the same process. And I love that you didn't know who the killer was until that far into the book. That's fascinating, because obviously no spoilers, but like it's such a perfect thing reveal. So
Thank
no
you.
spoilers. Everyone needs to read it. So we can all talk about it. The characters in this book, another thing I love about it is that they are so complicated and complex, and they're what you might call unlikable characters, unlikable women, and they're my favorite kind of characters. And I guess my question for you is, what unlikable women in literature or media inspired you?
I mean, I really love Amy Dunn from Gone Girl. She's like the ultimate, she's pretty despicable, but you just love her and you're rooting for her. And when you figure out what she's up to, and I know you and I share an infatuation with the movie Heathers, and I love all the wicked girls in that film so much. And going way back, I love that movie All About Eve and Eve Harrington in it. She's so wonderful and juicy. And then really solely, one of your main characters, Laurie, is one of the best, unlikable, but you cannot quit watching her characters. So those are some top ones for me.
Well, thank you for putting Sully in such good company. She would be really flattered to hear that. And I totally agree with you on everything you said. And I love that we share a love for Heathers. It's such a great dark comedy with so many interesting characters, and young Christian Slater. So can't go wrong. So good.
So good.
So one of my favorite things that you do in The Hunting Wives is that you upend the old boys club stereotype. And you the wives get into the same, devious behavior that men are often praised for and women are demonized for. When you were writing, did you set out to sort of expose this double standard, or did it just sort of emerge as you wrote? I love that you fused your suspense with this social commentary. So I'm curious as to how you went about that.
Thank you. I don't think it was purposeful in the very beginning. I just sort of had the plot concept, but as I was writing it, I was thinking, ooh, is that too much? Is that too racy? Is that too out of the box? Is that too sexy? And then I was like, I'm going to go for it, because women should be allowed to misbehave like men. And I had great fun doing it. And it is funny, the clapback one gets from writing unlikable women. And it's like, what are we supposed to just be in a box? Like, we have the same desires and the same complexities. And there's, and I loved that movie Unfaithful. I think that's the name of it, with Diane Lane, where she's
good. Yes.
Yeah, on Richard Gere. And it's like, there was no, good reason for her to, but she did. And I remember some early readers wondered if Graham, the husband in The Hunting Wives, should be bad, or there should be a reason Sophie's stepping out on him. And I'm like, no, it's really just what's going on with her. It really has nothing to do with him. And she should be allowed to have those urges. And not that it's great that she acts out on them, but she's human. So yeah.
No, I love that. And I loved that you didn't do that with Graham, because it made it so much more complex and so much more believable. Like you said, people cheat, and you rarely ever find somebody asking a man for justification in the same role. But you have a woman in this role, and you're going to get so many people judging her for something that the man wouldn't be judged for. So I loved that marriage dynamic. And, it made it frustrating to read, because in the back of your head, you're thinking, oh, Sophie, but Graham's a great guy. But you're right. People have urges and people make mistakes, and women should be allowed to make the same mistakes that men make without being demonized for it the same way. That men are never demonized the same. So I love that you did that. And it was so fantastic as I was reading it, that the way that you sort of pulled that double standard apart, it was just perfect. So wonderful. So obviously in this book, you capture toxic friendship and infatuation so well, and the complex bonds between these women. Sophie meets Margot and she's automatically sort of infatuated with her, and it felt so real. And I think it's something a lot of women can relate to. Did you set out to create this power dynamic, or did it happen subconsciously?
No, I did set out to, I knew that I wanted the novel to be about obsession and someone's life going off the rails if they sort of chase their darker desires. So I knew that, I guess I knew that Margot was going to be Margot from the beginning, and that Sophie would pretty quickly fall under her spell. And yeah, but I didn't know much beyond that. So it was fun to sort of hang out with them and see what they were going to do next.
Yeah, and I think a lot of women have had, someone like a Margot in their life where somebody's cooler than you, or, more glamorous, or just has something that you want, or even just the way she carries herself or her attitude. And I think you explored it in such a fascinating way. And, it really shows, like, as a testament to your writing, that you venture into this book with Sophie and can be in her head so much as she makes these questionable decisions. And of course you're wanting to kind of shake her through the pages and say, oh, Sophie. But it's so believable, and that's what sort of makes it really chilling for me, is that it could happen to anyone. So I bravo for you for doing that.
Well,
I'm going to interrupt again and ask you a question. Do you think that the dynamic between these women could be achieved without social media? Is this something that could have happened, let's say, in the 1980s? Or to what degree are the influencers and the communication channels and all, even the anonymity of social media, allowing stuff like this to happen? We see it a lot with kids, how terrible it is for them.
yeah.
And you've taken it up to an adult level. But it seemed to me that this is a story that has to be of its time now, that it wouldn't really have worked 30 or 40 years ago when I was that age.
I think you're right, Barbara. I do feel like there is something new with social media, that it's almost like a pressure cooker. And I don't think Sophie would have had the access to Margot that she did. Maybe without it, she might have met her, but she wouldn't have known as much about her and been as invested in her. So I do feel like, yeah, it had to be in this era for it to be the way it was. The way she sort of, analyzes her Facebook posts and, her text messages. And it's definitely like of the times sort of anxiety of, I can't imagine being a kid these days and trying to navigate those sorts of social signals over social media and text message. I mean, I can barely do it as a 47-year-old. I can't imagine being 16 and trying to figure all that out. So yeah, I do feel like, and maybe that's part of why Sophie does seem almost like a teenager sometimes, or a schoolgirl, because it is heightened by that social media aspect of it.
It was a lot like high school, I thought, looking back on high school, the way I remember it. But, there's a lot of conversation about the fact that people can curate their own lives. And now everybody can tell their own story, publish their own story. We see it at the bookstore. It's so interesting when people come to author, well, when they could come, and hopefully will again come to author events. And, everybody has a phone now. Everybody has a camera. And way back when I started the store, people were excited about getting their books signed. But now the dynamic is that what people are excited about is to take photos with the author. And if you have a real glamour author, we're the Outlander bookstore. So Diana's like a walking, whatever. And what you realize is that everybody there with their camera is wanting to make that part of their story. Look, I was here, envy me. I got to stand next to author X and whatever. And if you take that on into the world of social influencers, Instagram, all the rest of it, what you see are all these curated lives, and you think your own is shit next to it, comparatively speaking. And I think that's a part of the dynamic that you wrote about. And it is a real pressure cooker, but you're pointing out it's not just for young people. It can be a real pressure cooker. I mean, I loved it that she came from Evanston. I grew up there. I mean, I grew up at Winnetka. So, you know, I came from the North Shore, and actually, it was a fairly interesting place, but she's bored. And to me, going to Texas from Evanston is hilarious. I would have gone the other way. So, you know, but, you know, the very fact that her life isn't interesting enough in a suburb and she wants to go somewhere sets her up, I think, then for envying or wanting to be part of this, you know, more glamorous stuff, more action oriented stuff she sees around us. That's probably, I don't know. What do you think, Laurie? Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I think so. I think social media makes, like you're saying, people can curate their own lives, and people can filter themselves so that they look perfect. And it's so much easier to be jealous of someone when you only see their highlight reel, essentially. So say if it was like, you know, 20, 30 years ago and this social media wasn't a thing, then you would sort of see that person, even if you are sort of infatuated with this person you meet, you'd sort of see them as more human and see their flaws off the bat. Whereas on social media, you can, you know, be creeping someone on Instagram and never even interact with them and still be jealous of them. And because you're only seeing what they're putting out, which is probably going to be flattering and good stuff. So I find social media fascinating, how it's sort of altered the landscape of things. And I agree with May, and I would not want to be a kid growing up right now, because you know, teenage years are hard enough without that added pressure of everyone else looking perfect when you feel so awkward. So I think, but I think it's correct to say this, you know, adults fall under the same spell as teenagers sometimes with them.
You know, that's an old Dickensian or Victorian trope, you know, the little match girl out in the street, you know, and she's dirty and she's hungry and she's cold and she's looking in the window and seeing, you know, people with, you know, who are warm and well fed and more glamorous. I'm trying to remember, because I haven't seen it for forever. Was Breakfast at Tiffany's a little bit like that? Was Audrey Hepburn the waif, you know, kind of outside the gorgeous window of Tiffany's and imagining what it would be like? I think so. I mean, I'd have to see it again, but is that
Yeah.
sort of the same dynamic?
I think that's absolutely right. That's so interesting that you brought that film up, because I was thinking about unlikable characters and how when I first saw that movie with my mom, I didn't love her, and I thought she does such a good job of being like so idiosyncratic and wonderful. Anyway, I was just thinking about that film literally yesterday. So that's a very good description of her when the film opens, and I love that.
I loved in this book how you, through Sophie, sort of explored the dichotomy of what women want versus what society thinks we should want. So that's something that I really honed in on right away when I was reading. So I'm wondering what inspired you to focus on this as a theme in your book.
Gosh, I just feel like, and it goes back to Barbara's point about our lives being curated. So there's the one side where, you know, you're watching someone else's life play out on Instagram and you're jealous. And then there's the pressure that you have to have this sort of Pinterest perfect life too. And I feel like, you know, women right now, you know, they can have the career, they can stay at home, they can do both. I mean, I guess a lot of us are doing both now with the pandemic. But there's all this pressure to all of a sudden you need to just be happy with it all, and you need to be a happy mom. And I still feel like that's great, but you know, child rearing can be very monotonous and boring and hard, and it's hard work. And so I feel, you know, I did feel like women should be allowed to complain about it a little bit or blow off steam. And maybe I took it to the extreme, but yeah, I kind of wanted to get in there and play with that, you know, these perfect lives that we're all supposed to lead, and how happy is anyone really? How happy are y'all out there? I don't know. I mean, it all just feels very pressury. And I do think social media adds to that, because we're all supposed to be posting about happy things and this is what I, cooked for dinner when I didn't have much time, but it's beautiful and my kids love it. I don't know. That sounds probably pretty jaded, but that's where I was when I was writing it.
I love it. It came across so clearly, and you're so right. There is so much of that jealousy, and that your own feelings of inadequacy can be amplified when you see what other people are doing, and versus what you're supposed to be doing. Like if I see somebody cooking a lovely meal, I'm going to be like, well, I made chicken fingers for the third night in a row for my kids tonight. So I don't know. It's really, there's like literally so many avenues that you can compare yourself to other people, and social media has made it so that there's multiple platforms that you can use to hold yourself up against other people and probably fall short. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. And something I love about The Hunting Wives is that it fuses suspense and social commentary, which my favorite books do. You do that so incredibly well. Why do you think people have such an appetite for these stories?
I feel like, I sort of feel like with maybe suspense in general, this is just my gut. I kind of feel like people want to see how far these characters will go, and then maybe internally ask themselves, would I behave in the same way? It's kind of a safe way to explore darker thoughts and things and see, ooh, would I do that? I don't think I would do, but I want to watch her do it. So I just feel like some of it's just it's kind of like a joyride, and it's kind of thrilling. And I really did have fun watching Sophie's life go off the rails because that's fun. Yeah, that sounds terrible. But I think,
No, I
yeah,
love.
this one, whenever you hear like the plot and it's murder or cheating or some horrible thing, we're immediately like, ooh. And I think it's because we're asking ourselves, like, internally, where's our moral compass with this? And I don't know. That's just, what do y'all think? Barbara, what do you think?
I'm reminded of a really interesting comment P.D. James made years ago to me at the Poison Pen. And I think we were talking about serial killer books. I can't remember for sure, but anyway, whatever it was, fairly gruesome. She was annoyed in part because the British term for cozy is entirely different than the American term. And so in British terms, she writes cozies, which, considering the rivers of blood and all the horrible stuff that happens, is hilarious in that sense. But anyway, she said, satisfying it is, to be a reader and to lie in bed with a terrifying book and realize that the footsteps sounding on the stairs was not coming for you.
Oh, I love that.
Which I thought was just a fabulous way of, and other people who said, we read books like this to face our alligators. That probably was Carl Hyacin, although that may just be the Florida thing that I'm attributing it to him. But I think you have a very good point that we do wonder how we would behave. But I'll also throw this out to you. I've lived through the sexual revolution, but I'm almost twice your age. So, you wouldn't have done that. But you have to wonder too, if some of the liberating aspects of all of this is that women used to face more severe consequences for sexual activity than men did. I mean,
Yeah.
Men didn't get pregnant. And so there was Victorian literature in particular is absolutely filled with women, who made unfortunate sexual choices or got forced into bad sex or, into sex and so forth. And then the consequences destroyed their lives. And, we're finding out a lot of stuff about 23andMe and all when people do genetic testing and find out to their shock, that maybe they're not really the children of their parents or whatever because of all of this. So I think you're writing your books at a time when this kind of behavior doesn't seem so scary in the sense of those kinds of consequences. I mean, you can still get an STD or something, but women are able now, thanks to modern medicine, to escape unwanted pregnancies or so, So I think that the different environment, if I were reading your book 50 years ago, I probably would have been far more, I don't know what I would have done, actually thinking about it. How would I have reacted? It's an interesting question. I probably would have said, oh, honey, this is going to be so bad.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It is a different time, and I know that is so fascinating, Barbara. I never thought about that. The consequences in the past, the stakes are lower now.
Yeah, well, this is what's fun for me is to be talking to younger writers like you. I mean, and we've had the store now for 31 years. So lots of the authors that I have nurtured along all this time are now in their 60s or 70s. And, I love it meeting new authors that are in their 30s and 40s, occasionally in their 20s, but I'm not clear you can be a great author in your 20s, although every once in a while it does actually happen. And to see what your role is like. It's really, it's a lot of fun for me. And to that end, Laurie, tell us a little bit about your book, because we haven't had a chance to talk to you about it. Why don't you give us a little pitch for the girls?
Yeah, so The Girls is sort of like a Mean Girls, like very much darker, more disturbing Mean Girls with a bit of an I Know What You Did Last Summer twist. It takes place at a 10-year college reunion where the protagonist has received a note basically telling her she has to come to the reunion because somebody knows about what she did that night. And it was a night back in freshman year that she's, done her best to put behind her. And she believes that the person who sent the note to her is her best friend from back then, who is the only person who knows what she did, or so she thinks. But when she gets to the reunion, she finds out that her best friend has also received this note. Somebody is circling them who knows what they did freshman year and who wants revenge. So it's and sort of like May's book, but like The Hunting Wives, it sort of has a cast of complicated female characters who make some very bad decisions. And I think our books share that in common.
There are many books that, the basis of them are on the really poor decisions adolescents make and their desperate attempts to cover them up or suppress them or something. I like May's book for the fact that your character is older, because so often, adolescence it's almost a trope in a way, that really bad decisions that you make when you're young can come back and haunt you. And I love the fact that it can be turned into so many different stories, like your excellent book, Laurie. But I also think it's interesting to see an older character who does the same kind of thing and what happens. Patrick, why don't we call you up from your black hole and see if we have questions that you want to forward to us, or you may have questions of your own, or is this too female a conversation for you? Are you going to overcome the gender thing and leap in, kiddo?
Not a whole lot of testosterone here, but no, but I'm enjoying the discussion. It's funny, there aren't a whole lot of real serious questions here. People are watching and commenting. Well, here's a question from Bonnie for both of you. Let's see. Was there a particular author that inspired you to start writing?
Laurie, why don't you take that? I'd love to hear your answer.
I don't know about starting writing. I can't really think, because I feel like I've been writing forever in some capacity. Since I was a little kid. I was totally that kid who was like obsessed with books and would rather be writing stories and reading books than socializing. So, but I think the author that inspired me to start writing this kind of book was definitely Gillian Flynn with Gone Girl. I think that I still remember I read that book on a flight from Johannesburg to London, England, and it was a very long flight. And I read that book, like I just tore through it. I was fascinated that I hadn't read a book like that. And it was a total game changer for me, as I know it was for a lot of people. But I think reading that book really changed something for me, because I realized, okay, so women can be like that in books and can do these things and have these thoughts. And wow, okay, I want to write that. So I think that book was really the gateway for me. And another book that made a huge impact on me in what I wanted to write was Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Noel. I think like her female character in that book is also makes some questionable choices. And the book is a fantastic fusion of that suspense and social commentary and double standards. And that book really, kind of amplified for me what I wanted to write. So I'd say those were the two books that started things for me.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I mean, Gone Girl for me as well, in terms of crime fiction anyway. I've been working on a nonfiction book for 25 years, and I'm going to finish it soon. But yeah, reading Gone Girl, and like you said, that, oh wow, it's so groundbreaking in terms of the female character, and then also The Girl on the Train, that totally captivated me. I loved the propulsive nature of that book. And I'm a really big Tana French fan too. So she was a huge influence on me.
In the Woods was a truly wonderful book.
Has
Really.
either of you read Patricia Highsmith?
I haven't yet.
Yeah.
I'm guilty. I have not, and I want to. Of course I've seen The Talented Mr. Ripley, but I've
Right.
never read her. I know
Yeah,
we need.
you might enjoy her. She was way ahead of her time, I think. And wrote a lot about twisted obsession. Yeah, she's really, really great.
Which is neat and bring to Patrick, although you don't know that.
Not just
more
the
twisted and
Ripley
obsessive it
novels.
is, the happier Patrick is. It's so great.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. But not just the Ripley novels, although those are great, but also some of the strange standalones she wrote. There's some wonderful ones. Let's see.
Let me just ask, Laurie, are you a Joyce Carol Oates reader by any chance?
I haven't. I don't think I've read anything of hers.
Might be interesting. You actually resemble her in some ways. It's been interesting sitting here looking at you. But she has some, she's a wildly prolific and wildly expansive author. I mean, genre has no boundaries for her. She just writes all over the place. Really interesting. But you might find actually she writes a lot of literary criticism, right, Patrick?
I don't know how she does it.
Yeah, you might be interested. She's a professor at Princeton or something?
Princeton.
Yeah, and she writes like a book a month as far as, I mean, many times, but there's a lot of what she has to say you might find especially interesting.
I'll have to check her out. Well,
yeah. OAP, yes.
Yeah, there, Christina, she says, for both of you, does your next book utilize female relationships as an element?
Yeah, mine does. Yeah, I've just handed in another round of edits on it, and it's I can say a little bit about it. It's about 3 lifelong friends who live on the same, like in the same neighborhood now in another small town in East Texas, and their life is upended one day when a strange, sexy, dangerous man moves into the neighborhood, and it's just, yes, it's very twisty, and he messes with all their lives. And Laurie, please tell us about yours if you can, because it's our about y'all, and it's amazing.
Mine definitely involves female friendships as well. So mine is sort of like a Bridesmaids meets Gillian Flynn. So it's set at a bachelorette party. So it definitely kind of has that wedding industry criticism and the expectations on women within it, and how it sort of is designed for us to fail. So I think my book pretty much revolves around women and expectations and their relationships with each other and how they're challenged by this very stressful environment.
Can't wait.
I'm excited for yours too, obviously.
Let's see. Has either of you sold the film rights or TV rights for your books?
Laurie, why don't you answer that?
Sure. Yep. So mine has been, The Girls Are Also Nice Here has been optioned for a TV series by AMC, which is pretty wildly exciting to me since I love AMC. They put out my favorite show, Breaking Bad, and they've done The Walking Dead and Mad Men. So, that was a totally surreal moment for me as an author. So yeah, there's some developments happening with it that I'm not allowed to talk about yet, but fingers crossed.
I'm not really allowed to talk about what's going on with mine, so I'll just leave it at that.
That sounds so cool to say. I mean, authors always say that.
That's right.
Christina also suggests the book, The Plot, that we talked about just the other day with Jean Hanff Korelitz.
Absolutely brilliant book. It truly is a remarkable book, and it is crime fiction, but she's not a crime fiction writer. This is a book that just naturally took her into this world, but it's not the world she normally lives in. So you can watch it. Our Facebook video page, there's a really great conversation with Jean Korelitz and Joe Finder that's there. And also there's a terrific conversation with Gillian Flynn and Dennis Lehane that we did March 31st, I think. It's had over 60,000 views, but you might want to see it. Because one of the things they talked about was how do you go on if you've written a blockbuster book? What expectations do readers have? What expectations do you have for yourself? I thought their discussion about that was really interesting.
I'll have to watch both of those. They sound fascinating.
Yeah, they really are. It was a 20th anniversary thing for Dennis Lehane, where we did sort of a pop-in event with Dennis and Gillian. But I thought it was an amazing conversation, didn't you, Patrick?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was great.
It really was. So there's tons of videos on our Facebook. You just go to poisonpen.com and click on Facebook video. You don't have to belong to Facebook to watch them.
I'll have to check that out too.
Yeah, I think you'd really like it. But I've never talked to Joyce Carol Oates, so I can't offer you a video for that.
Yeah. Well, that's about it as far as questions go.
Great. Was there anything else, Laurie, that you wanted to ask? You've prepared so carefully. I don't want to toss any of your questions aside here.
No, I have one last fun question for May, and just in honor of the Hunting Wives, what is your beverage of choice?
My beverage of choice is a filthy martini, a filthy gin martini with little ice flecks in it, like Margot likes it.
Sounds
Perfect.
wonderful. I've been remiss in not actually toasting you because, in fact, tomorrow is your publication day, and this is a lovely pre-publication event. But I'll hold up my glass of ice water, which is better than nothing.
Water too.
Ice water too.
Usually we do BYOB, but somehow or other it got away from us today. But anyway, it's really been a pleasure to meet both of you. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. And I hope we'll see you both with your second books. Be nice if you could come to Scottsdale, but you know, one of the great things about Zoom is that we can get people together that might not otherwise coalesce in one place. So we're planning to keep it. In addition, we've actually videoed our in-store events for over 2 decades. So what's interesting about this is it expands the audience.
I'm actually getting a few interesting questions coming in under the wire here. Let's see. Well, Debbie asks, and this is for both of you, what author would you like to have dinner with? I don't think she's restricting it to living or dead authors. I think just whoever.
No, she's been reading the New York Times book review.
Oh, I'm obsessed with Donna Tartt, and The Secret History was probably a book I reread once a year or once every 2 years. And I love The Goldfinch, and I just I'd love to know how her brain works. Just The Secret History was a huge inspiration as well for my writing. It's so dark and so richly detailed, and that campus setting, and I just found it fascinating, and I would love to have dinner with her and figure out how her brain works and thinks of these things.
Don't miss Alex Michaelides' new book, The Maidens, if you like The Secret History.
I'm dying to read that one. It looks so good.
Yeah, you'll love it. I think he does a marvelous job with Cambridge, aside from everything else. It's really very good. How about you, kiddo?
Gosh, that's such a great question. It's hard to pick just one, right? I think I would say, probably Anna French. Going back to her, I would love to just talk to her about her process and how she does what she does. I'm just endlessly fascinated by her novels, and I love Ireland, so it'd be great.
And you got a last question there, Patrick?
Let's see. There was another one here. Well, Lauren asks, which character was your favorite in the Hunting Wives?
That would be Margot. For me, I loved writing Margot. I found her so intoxicating and dark and also very mysterious. Like I truly was trying to discover who she was as I was writing, because she's very complicated, a little bit tragic, and very powerful. So she was my favorite and the most fun.
I agree. I'm Team Margot. I just like, you really made such an intoxicating character and so complex, and that's what I loved. It wasn't just one of these cases of, oh, she's like infatuated with this woman for no reason. You just really felt pulled into her, and that charisma and that dark, seductive, persona that she has. I just loved it so much.
Ooh, dark seductive. I love those words.
Yeah. So Laurie, what would be the beverage of choice for your characters in your world? I'm thinking absinthe, maybe a little bit.
Now it is legal again, right?
I think the women and the girls are also nice here. We're big on the vodka. Yeah, that was their beverage of choice. Definitely not mine, but it's I think they had a little bit too much of that.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies, very, very much. And I want to thank everybody who's watched us this evening. There'll be a podcast available. And since this video will stay on our Facebook video page and you don't have to belong to Facebook to watch it, do tell your friends and bring them in. And we did start out, in case you came in late, with a really interesting discussion about paths to publishing and how books are developed. So if you know any aspiring writers, you might want to encourage them to watch us. So good night. Thank you very, very much indeed. Enjoy your day tomorrow, your official publication day, May.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thanks, Patrick, and thank you, Laurie.
All right,
Thank
and
you.
don't forget, we have autographed copies of The Hunting Wives available as they just arrived today. Hooray. Right? Okay, bye.
Good evening,
Bye.
everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.